The history of the Constitution-class. The Constitution-class was a Federation Class 1 heavy cruiser in the Starship-class. They were the premier front-line Starfleet vessels in the later half of the 23rd century. They were designed for long-duration missions with minimal outside support and are best known for their celebrated missions of galactic exploration and diplomacy, which typically lasted up to 5 years. By 2267, there were approximately 12 Constitution-class starships in the fleet. These included the NCC-1700, the USS Constellation, the USS Defiant, the USS Enterprise, the USS Excalibur, the USS Exeter, the USS Hood, the USS Intrepid, the USS Lexington, and the USS Potemkin. The most famous Constitution class was the USS Enterprise, NCC-1701. Launched under the command of Captain Robert April in 2245, the Enterprise gained its notoriety during the historic 5-year mission, 2265 to 2270, under the command of James T. Kirk. In 2266, on Stardate 1709, the Enterprise was instrumental in preventing a war between the Federation and the Romulan Star Empire, when a Romulan bird of prey crossed the neutral zone and destroyed several Earth outpost stations. Captain Kirk barely managed to outwit the enemy commander and stop the vessel from returning to Romulus and reporting on the Federation's weaknesses. The mission parameters for the class meant that its vessels usually operated widely dispersed on their own, and that encounters with class sisters were few and far between. However, in the year 2267 saw a gathering of the class when a large part of its vessels was assembled at Starbase 11 for refit and repair. Despite the success of the class exemplified by the performance of Kirk's ship, the mission parameters for the Constitution class also meant that the vessels of that class operated under highly dangerous circumstances, resulting in a relatively high loss rate, and that being assigned to one was hazardous at best. In 2267, for example, the USS Constellation, under the command of Commodore Matt Decker, fell victim to what has become known as the Doomsday Machine when it was on a routine survey mission near system L374. Both ship and entire crew were lost. Likewise, and less than a year later, in 2268, the Vulcan-manned USS Intrepid was lost with its entire crew in a fatal encounter with a huge, simple cellular being in star system Gamma 7A of Sector 39J. Later that year, the USS Exeter became infected with an unknown virus, a residue from biological warfare which had raged on Omega 4, and which the ship was orbiting, again killing her entire crew save the captain, Ronald Tracy. While undamaged, the contaminated ship was for the time being left adrift. In late 2268, the Excalibur, Hood, Lexington, and Potemkin took part in the disastrous testing of the M5 multitronic unit, which had been placed in control of the Enterprise. The Excalibur was severely damaged, with all hands lost. The Lexington also was brutally assaulted by the M5 computer when the unit became unstable. Later that year, Defiant responded to a disastrous call from an unexplored sector of space, claimed by the Tholian Assembly. Shortly upon entering the region, the Defiant crew began experiencing sensory distortion, and insanity quickly spread throughout the ship. The ship's surgeon was unable to determine what was happening, and eventually the insanity induced by the phenomenon led to the crew killing each other. 3 weeks later, Starfleet ordered the Enterprise to mount a search mission to locate the Defiant. On Stardate 5693.2, the Enterprise located her adrift, lost between universes in a space warp. As a result of later phaser exchange between the Enterprise and several Tholian vessels, a hole was created through the spatial interface, pushing the Defiant into the Mirror Universe. The Defiant emerged in the 22nd century Mirror Universe, where the Tholians of that universe had created the interphase rift by detonating a tricobalt warhead within the gravity well of a dead star. The Defiant was initially captured by the Tholians, but taken over by the Terran Empire with the control of the ship passing to Hoshi Sato. In 2267, the ISS Enterprise was a Constitution-class starship of the Imperial Starfleet, identical in configuration to the Prime Enterprise. Technical data. The Constitution class featured a saucer section, engineering section, warp nacelle layout common to most Starfleet vessels. Appeared to be identical at first glance, but at a closer inspection revealed minor differences on certain vessels. There were 3 different configurations of the original design. The first, used in the original pilot, featured a larger bridge dome and sensor/deflector dish and spikes on the buzzard collectors. Among other minor differences, the second configuration used in the second pilot and throughout the rest of the series due to footage being reused was similar to the first version, with the addition of running lights and additional markings and a grille pattern on the rear of each engine nacelle. The version used for the production of the regular series had a smaller bridge dome, a smaller sensor/deflector dish, and lighting effects in the buzzard collectors, which had their antenna spikes removed. The remastered edition of the TOS replaced all stock footage in later episodes with the proper configuration. The redesigned Enterprise, created for the motion pictures, has a sleeker, more modern look compared to the original configuration in the TOS era. However, it still maintains the original saucer section, engineering section, warp nacelle layout. The saucer section seems to reflect the design of the TOS movie era, especially with the exterior bridge design. The Constitution class had various science labs, numbering 14 in all. They were located in the primary hull in the class original configuration. An officer's lounge and dining area would be located in the aft superstructure beneath the bridge after the 2270s refit. There were at least 7 turbolifts that allowed for the component separation in times of crisis. The primary and secondary hull could separate where the connecting neck joined the saucer, allowing either section to serve as a lifeboat if the other section was damaged too badly. If an emergency was confined to the warp engine nacelles, it was theoretically possible to disengage and jettison them while keeping the bulk of the vessel intact. Any hull separation was considered a dangerous procedure and was not always an option. The Constitution's class primary command center, the main bridge, was located on the top of the vessel's primary hull on Deck 1. From here, the commanding officer supervised the entire ship's operation. The command chair was located in the recessed area of the center of the room, in a direct line with the main viewer. Consequently, the captain could be immediately updated on the conditions of the vessel or its crew during the missions, and orders could be clearly given with the minimum of effort. The chair was mounted on a circular pillar attached to the rectangle footplate that was directly anchored to the deck, giving it considerable support during an attack. It was designed to swivel on the support so that the captain could turn to any member of the bridge crew. Piloting and navigation functions were carried out at the helm's console, located at the center of the room, positioned in front of the command chair. This panel consisted of 3 main sections. Other stations on the bridge were provided for communications, engineering, weapons control, gravity control, damage control, environmental engineering, science, and library computer, and internal security. All stations were normally manned at all times. Mounted into the room's forward bulkhead was the main view screen. Visual sensor pickups located at various points at the Constitution class's outer hull were capable of image magnification and allowed a varied choice of viewing angles. The computer systems on board the Constitution class starships were duotronic based. The bridge of the Constitution-class starships were subject to many minor and major cosmetic changes over their many years of service. In particular, the main bridge of the USS Enterprise seemed to have undergone considerable changes in appearance. In the late 2260s, along with the added turbolift, the bridge design changed from a segmented, flat-panel, peripheral station configuration to a completely circular design, including curved overhead view screens and railings and steps which matched the arc of the circumference. At the same time, an automatic bridge defense system was also installed that obscured the translucent overhead dome, which did not return until the Galaxy-class bridge. Propulsion systems. The Constitution class of starships had been fitted with both lithium and dilithium reactor circuits in the warp drive assembly over its service lifetime. The vessel's standing cruising speed was warp 6, while its maximum cruising speed was warp 8. Warp 9 was also possible for this class of starship, although it was highly discouraged because it was an unsafe velocity. The USS Enterprise was twice modified to achieve a speed of warp 11. The probe Nomad increased the ship's engine efficiency by 57% in 2267, allowing the ship to reach warp 11. But Kirk persuaded Nomad to reverse its repairs because the ship's structure could not stand the stress of that much power, and it would have eventually destroyed his ship. The maximum warp speed recorded for this class by itself was warp 14.1, achieved by the Enterprise due to the sabotage to the vessel's warp drive system. While the ship itself was not structured to take on that speed for any length of time, the Enterprise was able to maintain that velocity for nearly 15 minutes. The Enterprise also maintained stability at warp 22 while tractored to a ship going warp 32. This was from the animated series, so take it or leave it. The Constitution-class impulse drive system was a twin-port engine, capable of velocities of at least warp factor 0.8. Main engineering. Main engineering was from where the ship's warp drive was controlled. All thrust and power systems were primary controlled from this site, and it was also where the main dilithium crystal reactor was located. Life support was controlled separately from Deck 6. Main engineering was lodged on decks 14 and 15. Deck 14 was the uppermost level of the engineering hull, and was the anchoring framework for the connecting dorsal and the warp nacelle pylons. On the forward end of the deck was the engineering monitoring room, which encircled the intermix shaft and opens to the rear into the engineering computer bay. Deck 15 housed the main engineering room, located in the center of the room and extending for many levels both above and below the deck. This complex, radically new design in the intermix technology provided operation power for both impulse drive systems and furnished enough additional energy to power all other systems on board the ship. Tactical systems. Laser and phaser systems. During the early 2250s, Constitution-class heavy cruisers were armed with a complement of directed energy weapons that possessed enough power to destroy half a continent in a concentrated bombardment. In addition, these vessels carried on-board laser cannons, capable of operating on energy fed remotely from the ship. By 2266, phaser banks were standard complement on board ships of this class. A bank actually consisted of a single emitter and its power supply, though it was common practice to fire two banks at the same time. Ship-mounted phaser banks had a range of approximately 90,000 kilometers. Like hand phasers, they were capable of being adjusted to stun, heat, or disintegrate targets, including objects or beings in space or on a planet's surface. The focus could be adjusted from a narrow to wide beam. When only motion sensor readings were available, the ship's phasers could be set for proximity blast and bracket the approximate coordinates of the target. In the original configuration, a battery of several forward phaser emitters were located on the lower part of the ventricle side of the saucer section. Aft firing banks were located above the shuttle bay on the secondary hull. There were also port, starboard, and midship phasers. Torpedo systems. Early configuration Constitution-class ships originally mounted 6 forward-facing photon tubes on the underside of the saucer section, and 1 aft-mounted tube at the end of the secondary hull. This combined arsenal was powerful enough to destroy the entire surface of a planet. Deflector shields. The Constitution-class starship had a powerful deflector shield grid in the 2260s. The shields were divided into 4 segments, referred to as number 1 shield, 2 shield, etc. At full power, with the warp reactor tied to the shield system, it was capable of absorbing and repulsing a bombardment of energy impacts equal to that of the detonation of 360 photon torpedoes of the type the Enterprise was equipped with at the time, before the shield power was completely lost. In 2267, for example, the Enterprise survived an attack from the Nomad probe. Nomad fired 4 powerful bolts of energy, each with the equivalent of 90 photon torpedoes. The first hit reduced the shield power only by 20%. After being hit with equal force of 270 photon torpedoes, warp maneuvering power was lost. Shields were lost with the 4th hit. The deflector shield grid was much more vulnerable to intense standard phaser bombardment. In 2268, an Orion scout ship was able to cause buckling in some of the shields of the Enterprise after it had made just 5 attack runs on the ship. On the 7th run, the Enterprise lost one of its 4 shields. Other more powerful weaponry could take the shields down more easily. The Planet Killer, for example, could completely deplete the Constitution-class starship's shielding power with only 3 hits from its anti-proton beam. Transportation systems. Extravehicular transportation to and from the ship was accomplished by a number of transporter systems, which allowed personnel or equipment to be transported over long ranges. The transporter platform featured 6 pads which were numbered clockwise, beginning with the right front. Landing and cargo facilities. Deck 17 was the main access level of the engineering hall. The aft landing bay provided personnel in small crafts with a mean of entering or exiting the ship, as did docking ports on either side of the level. The original configuration of the Constitution class carried a standard complement of 4 shuttlecrafts, some of which were Class F. Medical systems. On the original Constitution-class starship, a sick bay facility was located on Deck 6, which featured an examination room, a nursery, the chief medical officer's office, and a medical lab. At least one other medical lab was located elsewhere on the vessel, and was used for biopsies. Among other things, sick bay was considered the safest place to be on the ship during combat. Crew quarters. Crew quarters were located throughout the saucer section, keeping with the Starfleet tradition. Deck 5 housed the senior officer quarters. On the refit configuration vessels, these staterooms were quite similar to the VIP units on Deck 4, with only few differences. On the starship of the original configuration, the officers' quarters featured 2 areas separated partly by a wall fragment. One area was allocated as a sleeping area, featuring a comfortable bed, and another as a work area, including a desk and computer terminal. Entrance to a bathroom was provided through the quarters sleeping area. Both areas could be configured to a personal preference. Recreational facilities. On board the original Constitution-class starships were at least 6 recreational rooms, which included 3-dimensional chess and card game tables. There was also a holographic rec room, which was a predecessor to the holodeck, as featured in Star Trek the Animated Series. Also, there was an arboretum, gymnasium, a bowling alley, a theater, and a chapel. Background information. Registry number. Art director Matt Jeffries was, apart from designing the ship, also responsible for conceiving its original famous registry number, NCC 1701. As he explained, since the 1920s, N has indicated the United States Navy terms, and C means commercial vessel. I added an extra C just for fun. Interestingly, Russia's designation is CCC, so the N and the C together kinda made it international. After that, I had to pick some numbers. They had to be easily identifiable from a distance, so that eliminated 3, 8, 6, 9, and 4, none of which are clear from a distance. That didn't leave me much, so 1701 was as good a choice as any. The reason we gave the choice afterwards was that the Enterprise was the 17th major design of the Federation, and was the first in its series, 1701. Saucer separation. A saucer separation capability for the Constitution class was suggested as early as the second season of the original series, in the original script of the episode The Apple, but was never produced for budgeting reasons. The capability was, however, envisioned by the producers, designed to operate separately from the rest of the ship. The saucer therefore contains all elements necessary for independent operation. Another saucer separation sequence was envisioned by Andrew Probert in 1979, when the script treatments for Phase 2 successor, the motion picture, were in flux. During a lull in script development, Probert came up with an alternate scene in which V'ger releases the Klingon battle cruiser. Upon rematerialization, the Klingons, due to their nature, immediately attack the Enterprise. During the battle, Kirk is forced to perform the maneuver akin to that of William T. Riker in The Best of Both Worlds Part 2. Douglas Turnbull liked the idea and had Probert draw up a color storyboard to show the sequence. Some of the storyboards were published in the Star Trek the Magazine Volume 1, Issue 22, and in The Art of Trek, pages 198 and 199. Probert's concept was not entirely a flight of fancy, as an actual studio model in line with Goodwin's prior memo annotation was constructed in such a way that a saucer separation could be filmed if the need arose. Probert himself remarked in this regard, the Enterprise was always designed to separate from the engineering section. I knew about this when I did Star Trek the Motion Picture, and if you look at the bottom of Kirk's Enterprise, note the original configuration, you'll notice two triangular items, which are two of the landing feet for the saucer. Regardless of whether it was Matt Jeffries' original intention or not, it's sort of the way that the Trekdom or Star Trek lore has labeled those features. So taking my cue from the Star Trek the Motion Picture, I placed 4 landing legs at the bottom of the Enterprise and created a very specific separation line on the dorsal. Thank you for watching the history of the Constitution class. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you can. If you're already a subscriber, you are awesome. Bye-bye.